its close. The sense of the rhythm of the retreat and our time together becomes more familiar. The coming and going from the shrine room, the patterns of the meals coming together, the rituals of chanting, bowing together. This all becomes more familiar, it becomes our home territory. One of the aspects of mind, our experience, that I'm sure everyone is very familiar with by now, even if you've not done that much in the way of retreats before, certainly doing this amount of formal meditation together and watching the mind doing its thing during the course of the day. We witness over and over again the mind following its storytelling habits. How often during the day, the last couple of days, has the mind taken hold of a particular object? We hear the sound of a bird, or we notice the flavor of a particular ingredient in the food, or the smell of a certain aroma of a certain kind of tea, or we see the color of somebody's shawl, or the gladioli on the shrine, and then before we know it, the mind has wandered off and disappeared down a rabbit hole. Oh, there's a really nice gladdies on the shrine. That's a really interesting color. It's a kind of purpley magenta. I never saw those, but I wonder where they got those from. Oh, there's a color. There's that garden centre down in Great Garston. There's the other one on the road, just near Pickett's End, right? That's a Hilliers place. It's probably Hilliers. They mostly do trees. And off we go down the infinite labyrinth of rabbit holes of our imagination. So this is a useful process to understand. Sometimes it's quite benign, like wondering about where the gladioli came from. Other times it can be quite stressful or agitating, consuming the mind, creating all kinds of worries and tensions, imagined realities of what's going on around us, the kind of delusions about what that person thinks about me, and can become quite burdensome, difficult. I was remembering some years ago how a long time ago now, nearly well, actually 30 years ago. Good heavens. 30 years ago, I remember. So I was on a long walk through England, and myself and a layman, Nick Scott, were walking from Chithurst Monastery in West Sussex to the new Vihara, the new monastery up in Northumberland, and this was a very interesting and at the time very novel undertaking for this country. It's the ancient Buddhist tradition of wandering through the countryside, going on Tudong, as it's called in the Thai language. It was a new introduction to England, and this was a long journey, and we'd already walked about 750 miles or so. It was a very wiggly route. Speaking of labyrinthine journeys, it was a very wiggly route through England, and so even though this was a sort of Dhamma pilgrimage and very much set in the context of this is all Dhamma practice and everything is uncertain, there was a point along the way where we were already in Cumbria, and we just had sort of 2 more counties to cross before we reached our destination in Northumberland. So we were in the southern part of Cumbria near Morecambe Bay, and so we'd already walked a long way, didn't have far left to go, and everything had gone quite smoothly. It had been a real sort of marvellously epic journey. And so when we arrived in this area, it was near Manjushri Institute, then we got a message. I forget exactly how we got the message, because they didn't have cell phones in those days. Somehow or other the message reached me that Ajahn Amaro wanted me to call. As soon as we got to Manjushri Institute, there was this message from Ajahn Amaro. Oh, by the way, could you give me a call when you get to Manjushri? And he was ringing from this retreat center called Kailash Bhawan, where he was going to be leading a retreat. And for some reason, I know not why, my mind conjured up the idea that Ajahn Ananda was going to tell us that we had to scrap the rest of the walk, and then we had to get on a bus and get back to Harlem as quickly as possible for some undisclosed reason. And in the 2 or 3 days between the time I got this message and before I actually made the phone call to Ajahn Ananda, my mind conjured up this extraordinarily intricate story of, why it was really wrong for him to demand that we should get on the bus and scrap the rest of our journey, even though this was all a Dhamma practice and it's all about letting go and everything being uncertain and not being attached to the journey that we were making, but how it was really inappropriate, wrong for him to make us give up the rest of the journey. And I had this whole script worked out, because I could also I could figure out what he was going to say, all his arguments about why we should be in a hurry and we should let go of the rest of the walk, and what I was going to respond to all of his arguments. I had it was almost like a 5-page script of what arguments he would come up with and how I would counter them. I had the whole thing figured out, and any kind of nuance or different direction he would come up with, I would have already in my pocket. I'd have a comprehensive and convincing argument as to why we shouldn't do it that way. And predictably, it's very easy to figure out where the story is going. When I did get to Manjushri, and there's the payphone in the lobby, and Nick puts the money in, and my heart is pounding, and I'm ready with my script. There's Ajahn Ananda at the end of the line at the retreat place, Kailash Bhawan, and he said, "Oh, good to hear your voice, Venerable. Just wanted to see that everything was going okay. Anything we can do for you? Anything you'd like to that would be useful to have when you get here to the retreat center? Just say the word and I'll see what I can organize for you. Have a nice walk. Bye." And I wasn't sort of tempted to say, "Well, look, I've got all these lines worked out. You're not following the script. You're supposed to have this whole trip that you're on, that you're trying to persuade me to do something different." And it was laughable, really, because it was so completely different from what my mind had created. But in the isolation of just being in the countryside and camping out and just having me and Nick walking together, and mostly just sort of alone in my own thoughts, it was all very convincing. It all held together. I knew the kind of person Ajahn Ananda was. I knew the kind of demands he could make, and he was a very forceful character, and it was completely wrong. There was absolutely no attribute of what happened that bore any resemblance to what my mind was creating. So it was funny, and it was so different from the reality that it became sort of stuck in my mind as a really good example. Whenever the mind starts to script the future, Yeah. What's going to happen? When this happens, I'm going to do this. And when this happens, then I'm going to do such and such. And then when that happens, then I'm going to... And then... Now, I'm not going to stand for that, because, I'm just not going to go along with that. That's totally out of place. And I'm going to do this instead. And he's not going to like that. And I realized that in greater and lesser ways that my mind spent a huge amount of energy writing scripts for the future. And I realized that this was a very, very strong habit, and how it wasn't just on this occasion that it didn't really, my scripts didn't bear any relationship to what actually turned out. I tried to think back and consider, well, when in the past have I come up with these kind of proliferations and these imaginings, and has it ever actually mapped out? Has it ever really ever worked out the way that I imagined? And I realized, no, no, it never has done. And so that this is probably the same for, I would imagine. My guess would be that this is very similar for all of us. And we spend a huge amount of time and energy writing scripts for realities that never actually happen. And I found for myself, I've been in the monastery about 5 years by that time. It was still another couple of years before the script writing habit just sort of collapsed, because I think it just got bored or frustrated. Like, but I keep doing all this work, I keep writing all this stuff, and no one ever follows my words. Okay, I give up. So I think after I've been in robes for about 7 or 8 years, it finally sort of drew to a close. So this is a process that is good to get familiar with, and we can see how much difficulty and stress we create within ourselves by constantly imagining the future, or even rewriting the past. That was another favorite occupation of mine. Go back and rewrite how it might have been in the past, how it could have been in the past, and how and this was even more bizarre, where you go back to an incident that was 10 years ago, and you rewrite it to be in a slightly different form, and then you can get really upset or really excited about things that didn't actually happen. So you're getting all into a lather about something that you're reshaping from the way it worked out. And then there's this little voice saying, yeah, but it didn't happen that way. You didn't say that, and it didn't go that way. And, no, well, yeah, that might have been very wonderful and special, but it never happened. There's if any of you have ever read Ajahn Lee Damodara's autobiography, he describes an incident when he was a young monk, and he's sitting meditating one day, and he's thinking, well, I really like the monk's life. I really love being a monk. But there might come some circumstance where I have to leave and go back to the village. And what was her name? I really liked her. Oh, yeah. Well, she might not be married yet. And, well, if I did have to go back, if I had to go back and look after my parents, then, well, maybe she's still waiting. We did kind of like each other. And, well, I suppose I'd have to get married to somebody. You couldn't really live in the village and be single. So that would be nice. Yeah, and then we could get together and then... But, what would we do for a living? Because, my family are pretty poor. Hers are pretty poor as well. So... but what kind of work could we do? He said, well, actually, they started up with these. They started building match factories. So like matches. I heard there's a new match factory on the edge of the village. We could go and work in the match factory. It's hard work, but get quite good money, and it's pretty reliable. And then that would be. We could work in the match factory, and then and then when the kids came along, it would be a bit of a struggle, but I think we could make it. And then yeah, oh dear, but what if she got injured, you know, and then she was hurt at the factory one day, and then how will I look after the kids? Well, that'd be really difficult, because, you know, I haven't got any qualifications, and they'd never make me a manager, you know, that I'm kind of useless at organising things, and oh dear, and then who'll be looking after the children, and oh, you know, my mum's a bit sickly, and oh, that'd be a real problem, and he's getting into this whole scenario of how the kids are going to be looked after with his wife suffering from this terrible injury at the factory. And suddenly he realizes, hang on, wait. And he opens his eyes. Oh, I'm still a monk. Oh, well, that's a relief. It's a paraphrase of the story, but he says, you know, there's this sort of deep anxiety and there's heart pounding, sweating, worrying about how it's going to be for the children and who's going to look after them and my poor wife. And he says, actually, I'm not married. There aren't any children. I'm still a monk. It's a non-problem. So you know, we hear this and it's a funny story, and we think, oh yeah, ha 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 ha, yeah, poor bloke, and yeah. And then we don't have to rewind too much to sometime earlier today or yesterday when, oh yeah, right. That was me in the match factory working out what I was going to be doing when this or that happened, or you're worried about this particular situation, or all of the different creations that the mind conjures up. And then through those creations, and then getting drawn into them, getting lost in them, then the sense of tension, longing for something that might be wonderful, that's just around the corner, or longing for something that really almost happened 10 years ago. That would have been great, but it didn't quite happen. But never mind, it nearly did. Something that's appealing, or something that's threatening, something that's stressful. So this process in the Pali language is referred to as papancha. It's a wonderful word. I'm sure we'll be able to wangle it into the Oxford English Dictionary in a few years' time. Deserves to enter the English lexicon. Papancha. And they're usually translated as conceptual proliferation. It's this process of the mind running on and on and on, one thought associating with another, and then another, and then another, spinning out into creating this whole array of, as it's called, the multiplicity of thoughts and perceptions that beset the heart. And the Pali for that, if you're interested, is papancha sanya sankhara. So in the teachings, this is talked about by it's in this particular very useful sutta called the Madhupindaka Sutta. Then the Buddha speaks about this in brief, and then the whole picture is spelled out in more detail by the Arahant disciple of the Buddha's Mahakachana. And it's a very helpful teaching to get familiar with and to recollect, because it maps out how this process works. It starts off with sense contact. So something that we hear, something that we smell, or something that we see, a thought that arises randomly in the mind, a memory, an idea, some sense perception, the sense contact, phassa. And then sense contact, that particular contact, conditions of feeling. This is a basic sensation of liking, disliking, or neutral feeling. And then that, along with that feeling, then very rapidly comes the perception, recognizing the sound, or the color, or the smell, or the sensation, the idea, or the memory. So sanya is the basic form of that perception. So it's even before there's a word that comes in, or a few words to describe it, but it's the sense impression of, say, the purple color of the gladioli, or the smell of that particular herb tea, or the texture of the carpet under your feet. The sanya, the Pali word sanya, perception, then is related to the English word sign. Sign. So it's like the form that particular sense contact takes. And then very rapidly, following upon the sanya, then thought comes in and says purple, or aeroplane, or carpet, or pink, toadstool, whatever it might be. There's some very nice toadstools out on the grass in front of my kuti, just popped up now that it's the first day of autumn today. So that's called vitaka. Vitaka is conceptual thought. So the thought arises to name what that perception is. So far so good. It's all fairly simple and clear. Then vitaka conditions papancha. So this is this little chain of cause and effect that is happening. So then the first elements, contact, feeling, perception, and thought, they all happen very, very rapidly. And then it's with the thought, then the trouble begins. So vitaka then conditions the conceptual proliferation. We see the toadstool and we think, toadstool, why are they called toadstools? Has anyone ever actually seen a toad sit on one of these things? Why are they called toadstools? And that's a funny word. That'd be an interesting kind of photograph to have, wouldn't it? I wonder if I could find a toad somewhere and then position it on top of the toadstool and snap a picture. But everyone would think it was photoshopped anyway. Yeah, they do some really clever tricks with Photoshop nowadays. And I must get that new suite that came out. And this is papancha. So as we watch that happening in the course of our thoughts during the flow of a day, what we notice is that the further down the track that the mind goes, and the greater there is the sense of self, and the greater the sense of tension between me here and the world out there, the thing that I'd like to get and I haven't quite got yet, or the thing that's pressurizing me, the thing that's threatening me or hurting me or annoying me that I can't get away from. And so if you watch this process with lighter or heavier objects, this is almost invariably the way that it goes, that the further the mind wanders down these tracks of associative thought, the more it gets to be me with this sense of tension between me and the world, even if it's the world of our own memories or ideas. The sense of self, and then the alienation from the world, and the sense of stress and tension, as the Buddha puts it, the multiplicity of thoughts and perceptions that beset the heart. So me in here, the world out there, and then the tension, the stress, the friction between the two. One very simple and helpful practice to use, and I like to recommend in learning to get familiar with this, and to learn how to not follow the process, is to trace the trail of associations back to where they came from. So when you're in the middle of trying to figure out how you can order the new Photoshop suite from Adobe while you're on retreat, and you left your iPhone with the retreat managers, how you can wangle to, because they're going to put the price. Are you sure they're going to put the price up? And you've got to get the bargain now. They just say, well, wait a minute. Where did this begin? So you think, well, okay, I'm now thinking about how to buy this version of Photoshop. Now that came from thinking about a photograph of a toad on a toadstool. And that arose from me walking across the grass and seeing toadstool. That's where it came from. So it was just light meeting the eye. It was just seeing. That's all. And when we follow it back to its source, you realize it gets simpler and simpler the closer back to the root that you go. So at the beginning it's just seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. It's just a thought. And the further back you go to the root, to the origin, the less there is a sense of self, and the less there is a quality of tension, of stress, of friction between me, the feeling of a me in here, and the feeling of a world out there that has something that I want to get, or something that I'm lacking, or something that's stressing me or bothering me or threatening me. So this is a simple exercise to do, and it's also a kind of memory test. Where did this come from? But it's intriguing and also revealing how you can go from one of these deeply challenging encounters, like Ajahn Lee with his difficulty with his wife-to-be being injured at the match factory, then following, it was just, it started off with that thought, I really like being a monk. That's where it began. It was just a thought, just popped into the mind, and then it led into this whole other world. It was just a thought arising, doing its thing, taking shape, dissolving. That's it. And very simple, very natural, uncomplicated. And that when we trace the chain of thought back to its origin, what we find over and over again is that those simple sense contacts, smelling, hearing, feeling, seeing, there's a simplicity and naturalness and a purity, an uncomplicatedness to them. There's an integration of the heart. And this quality is called nippapancha, or freedom from prolixity or proliferation, or basically simplicity. And nippapancha is one of the attributes of the Buddha, so that it's like even though the Buddha had an extraordinarily vast intelligence and range of knowledge, nippapancha, the freedom from complication, was one of the attributes or the epithets of the Buddha. That even though his mind was capable of extraordinarily intricate thought and imagination and vastly ranging knowledge, his subjective experience of each moment was supremely simple and uncomplicated. Nippapancha. This simple practice I would really encourage, following this through. And then when you trace back these trains of thought, when we're caught up in some kind of paranoid delusion about that person, the third cushion over who's really got it in for me, because of she had that look on her face. We met in the doorway and she had that really nasty look on her face. She hates me. I know she hates me. And think, are you absolutely sure about that? I mean, where does that come from? And you follow it back and you realize, we did meet in the doorway, but then actually that person that looked so upset and so angry with me, they did actually just go into the bathroom. And perhaps they were just urgently needing to use the loo, and it was nothing to do with me at all. Aha. More often than not, that's the case, and we make it all such a personal story, and it's nothing to do with us at all. So when you follow it back and you see, it's just seeing, just hearing, just smelling, tasting, to notice that quality of simplicity, what the heart feels like when it's free of papancha, that we can know and be alert to directly. It takes a bit of mindfulness and it takes a bit of effort to do this. But when you learn to work with the trains of thought, the streams of papancha in this way, when you see over and over again, we go from our imaginings, our feelings of anxiety or excitement or threat or nostalgia, and over and over again it just comes back to seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. That's all. and then noticing the quality of relief and ease that's there, then that very impression, see things work in that way, is a powerful encouragement for us to not pursue those habits of complicating. And as the mind starts to wander off down those papancha tracks, then as we get more acquainted with how that works, then it strengthens that intuition within the heart that says, I know where this is going. I don't need to follow this. I don't need to get on this train. I don't have to pursue this. I think I'll climb off right here because I can see where this is going. And it just began with seeing that toadstool, or smelling the grass, or seeing that bird on the roof. That was all. And then we are much more able to abide in the simplicity, the purity, and the clarity of each moment. Now, one of the things that is most compelling or seductive about the stories that the mind tells is because it almost always it's bringing with it a stronger sense of self. There's this quality of me. I'm in the story. What I want to get, what I could become, what this dreadful thing that's going to happen to me, this pain in my knee, that we feel a twinge in our knee or in our back, and then there we are being wheeled into the operating theatre, and masked doctors and nurses gathering around us, and never going to. I'm sorry, but you're never going to walk again. Says, well, that it's my drama, even if it's some terrible thing that's going to happen. That you're convinced you're going to be wheeled into the surgery, carried out of the retreat and wheeled into the operating theatre. You're never going to walk again. But at least it's me that's never going to walk again. That's my story. I'm in it, and it's my life, my saga, my drama. Even if it's a horrible tragedy, at least it's my tragedy, which makes it really appealing. This is bhava tanha, or the desire to become. So one of the kind of sources of the papancha mill, the energy supply to the papancha mill, is this desire to be, the desire of the heart for defined being. I want to be something, even to be to be injured, to be a tragic figure, to be ruined, is better than to be nothing. Better to be a brilliant wounded fragment than just an undefined nothing very much. So that this quality of bhava tanha, the desire to become, is a very powerful force, and particularly when you're on a retreat and everything is deliberately simple, deliberately uncomplicated, there is that the habit within us that really wants a bit of complication, really wants a bit of something, anything, just to do or to be, or just to have a defined sense of, something to push against, so at least they'll feel like there's a me here who's doing some pushing, right? We want something, anything that will do, a nice unrequitable romance, or an incurable disease, or some inescapable obligation I've got to attend to. You notice when your mind locks onto something like that, there's a feeling of relief, like, it's insoluble, great. Because I'll never have to suffer with the problem of having solved this. I'm stuck with it forever. Great. It means there's a me here who's stuck with this thing forever. That's bhava tanha. And in the Buddha's teaching on the Four Noble Truths, he highlights this as one of the causes of dukkha, the causes of dissatisfaction. Probably most people are very familiar with the Four Noble Truths, and then the the role of tanha, or craving, as defined as the cause of dukkha, or that which is the arising of dukkha, is tanha, craving. And when we think of craving, then we tend to bring that into consciousness or our imagination as, wanting some sense pleasure, something to hear or to eat or to have. But kama tanha, so the desire for sense pleasure, is just one of the three kinds of desire that the Buddha defines when he's expounding and explaining the Four Noble Truths. The first one is kamaraga. That's the one that's most obviously noticeable, sense desire, the desire to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch pleasant things. But then there are the two quieter or less noticeable, less demonstrable kinds of craving, bhavatanha and vibhavatanha, the desire to become and the desire to get rid of. And those of you who are familiar with Luang Por Sumedho's teachings will have heard him talk about these two a lot. And I'd never even heard of them before. I was listening to Dhamma talks of his. When you hear about desire is the cause of suffering, of dukkha, then what you think of is sense desire, sexual desire, or desire for food or possessions or pleasant things. And I remember years and years ago when he started talking about bhavatanha, vibhavatanha, I thought, I never heard of that before. I'm sure that's not right. But he would often talk about these as saying these are actually, in terms of the meditator and training the mind for liberation, it's almost more important to recognize these kinds of craving. These are more of an issue or more of a problem, more of a difficulty for one practicing meditation than sense desire. Because kama raga, sense desire, is kind of obvious and visible. But bhavatanha and vibhavatanha, these desire to become, the desire to get rid of, they're much more sort of subtle and quiet, off in the wings, just out of range of vision. It's much easier then for them to operate without them being clearly seen. And also because the way that they operate can seem to be very wholesome and in accord with the right kind of practice, like the desire to become concentrated, the desire to become a good meditator, the desire to become peaceful, the desire to become wise, the desire to get rid of your chattering thoughts, the desire to get rid of your laziness and your greed and your aversive thoughts. Sounds like what you're supposed to do, right? Like textbook stuff, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? So over the years I felt it to be incredibly helpful, the way that Luang Por Sumedho would describe these and point out how, even though these might seem to be useful and appropriate actions, as long as the mind is trying to get rid of, like I was talking about the other evening, trying to get rid of our aversion, or trying to get rid of our chattering thoughts, trying to get rid of our lazy attitudes, or trying to wipe out our dullness, trying to become wise and so forth. Even though they are, to some degree, picking up wholesome objects, the way those objects are being picked up, like the idea of concentration or the idea of wisdom, the way that those objects are being picked up creates more conflict in the system. We're actually creating the causes of dukkha, of dissatisfaction, in the very way we're trying to pick up those wholesome objects, those wholesome goals. Now, bhavatanha, the desire to become, is very is an insidious and a powerful presence. So it's, in terms of developing the practice, it's really helpful to get to know that. So when you see this happening and the mind pursuing its patterns of papancha, into chasing off after imagined futures and pasts and alternative realities, it's helpful to look and to examine it and to notice that feeling of I, the me in the middle of this story, me in the middle of this drama, and that there's something that's enjoying that me-ness, that I-ness, that's sort of relishing that presence of me in the story. And that when that's let go of, even though when we let go of a story like that and we come back to just the openness of the present, there's awareness of the here and now, and there's a delight in that. There's a simplicity and a purity, and great. Once something has been let go of, if you notice, there's that delight lasts for about 3 or 4 seconds. It's like when the fridge, the kind of the hum of the fridge switches off, and you go, and the fridge goes quiet. You go, oh, that's nice. 1, 2, 3. So what else is going on around here? Yeah. You let go of something, and that the contrast between that activity, that buzz, like the buzz of the fridge, or the buzz of that thought, you let go of some, oh, it's all right, I don't have to go and work in a match factory, everything's fine. So there's a tangible sense of relief, of peace, of the nirodha, and then the bhavatanha kicks in, like, okay, so what else? Well, there must be something to do around here. So give me something to work with. Give me something. There's a hunting for some object, something to be, something to push against, or something to chase after, or something to have an opinion about, something to have a plan, and it's important. It's very difficult, but it's important to get familiar with that hungering, and to sit there and just say no. Just say no, like Nancy Reagan famously remarked in years gone by. When you're on a retreat like this, and we're only on sort of day 2 or day 3, so it probably hasn't really, the bhavatanha bug probably hasn't quite bitten yet. We're still in the sort of decompressing experience. But by about day 4 or day 5, you can find yourself reading the ingredients of the toothpaste. So, oh, hexachlorophene! They still put that in. Wow. Gosh, look at that. Oh, 0.06%. That's not very much. I wonder. So just to recognize that I'm reading the toothpaste. Why are the ingredients of the toothpaste suddenly interesting? We're just looking for some information, looking for some contact, looking for something to have an opinion about. Oh, that's less hexachlorophene than they used to have. I think I remember. This is all bhavatanha, the desire to be, to have a defined sense of I. Even if it's, I remember that there used to be more of this in the toothpaste. Or, I think I ought to encourage them to put more in. Write to Procter & Gamble and suggest they, change their recipe. That this is just bhavatanha, just that desire hunting for an object, just to give a sense of I and me and mine. And this is a difficult, a challenging area of practice, because it takes a lot of focus and effort to say no, to witness, to feel that urge of becoming, bhava, rising in the heart, and to trying to find a justifiable object, a genuine thing to have a reasonable worry about. That it does take a lot of effort to stay with that. But if we can stay with that and not buy into it, and just know this is the feeling of wanting, this is what's happening here, then that wave, that urge, flows through the heart, and just like any wave, it flows along, and then the wave breaks, and then once again there's the peacefulness and open quality of nirodha, cessation, as the reality of the present is apparent. And that simple naming of what's going on and what's here, I find is an extraordinarily helpful practice. That we have this capacity to reflect. We can bring the reflective mind to bear on the present experience. So just the mind that can say, oh, this is the feeling of bhava tanha. This is the desire to become. Look at this. This is the texture, the tone of what's happening in this moment. It's like this. Here it is. That simple process of naming what's present, recognizing that the feeling that is there. Again, it takes a bit of effort to remember to do that, but the effect of that is very potent. Just to in a way help the mind to break the habit of chasing after those stories and getting lost in the becomings. This is in a way an extension of mindfulness, or an attribute of mindfulness that is, it's a use of verbal thought, as they're using ideas or concepts or words. So it is employing the thinking faculty. But it's like the Buddha said, you're using a thorn to dig out another thorn. Like if you've trodden on a thorn, the thorn is stuck in your foot. You can use the second thorn, the point of it, to dig out the first thorn. So he said, you're using a thorn to dig out another thorn. So that when the mind is attached to a story, to raise the thought, oh, the mind is getting caught. This is the feeling of getting caught in the story. This is the relishing of a story. That this is the experience of becoming. This is the feeling of becoming, of bhava tanha. So you're bringing a thought into the mixture, but it's like a thorn that you use to dig out another thorn. So this can be a very powerful and useful tool. When I was in India for a year, I had a sabbatical year in India in 2004 to 2005. I had a year to travel around and visit the Buddhist holy places. And I was pondering before I left, I thought, what would be a good theme for Dhamma practice while I'm in India? I'd been there before, travelled a little bit in India, and I'm not sure exactly why, but I thought, well, it's probably going to be physically very demanding, and India being a big country, lots of travelling to do, and then staying in the holy places and living with the heat of the Indian climate and different physical conditions and discomfort in crowded trains and so on. And so I thought, well, maybe it would be a good idea just to meditate on feeling, just to use that as a focus for practice. Very simple. Just whatever the situation is, just ask myself, what's the feeling here? To set aside whether it should be, things should be this way, or they shouldn't be this way, or they could be a better or different way. To simply reflect and ask, well, what does this feel like? What feeling is this? And it turned into being an extraordinarily helpful, illuminating practice. It was also conditioned by Ajahn Sajito having been a number of years before. He and Nick Scott spent 6 months walking they did a 1,000-mile walk through northern India, visiting the Buddhist holy places on foot. So the story of that is gathered together in a couple of books called Rude Awakenings and then The Great Patient One. Available over in the Sala if you're looking for a thing to become. Like, I haven't read that yet. I wonder if that's legal. It's a great yarn. but it's some wonderful and agonizing elements to the story. But anyway, before they left on that pilgrimage, right here in this very hall, we in 1989, this very wonderful elder Chinese monk, Master Xuanhua, and his sangha were visiting Amaravati, and we had an informal question and answer session in here one day. And it was kind of interesting because Master Hua did not know that Ajahn Sucitto was planning to go to India within a few months' time. At least ostensibly he didn't know. And the question that Ajahn Sucitto asked was some kind of very sort of subtle and sort of intricate inquiry about the nature of samadhi. And it seemed as though Master Hua completely ignored his question altogether and didn't mention anything about samadhi. And he said, instead, when you go to practice in the place of the Buddha, do not find fault with anyone or anything. So Ajahn Sucitto, being an astute operator, thought, well, that's interesting. It wasn't what I asked at all, but but he took that statement, and that was what he used for as his sort of theme for traveling around India. Because any of you who have lived in India, maybe some of you even grew up there, or maybe you lived and traveled in India, you know it's very easy to find fault, particularly with things like train timetables or crowds of people, or the heat and the dust and the noise and so on. And so that turned out to be very helpful advice, and literally saved his life when they were attacked by some bandits. So I took that to heart, and okay, well, rather than find fault with any particular feeling in a particular situation, I'll just bring my attention to what the feeling is like, even if the feeling might be, you know, this is extremely hot, or you know, how many more people can get in this train carriage. And that year, I developed this simple practice of just naming what the feeling was, or what the mood, and sort of defining what the mood was. And what this did for me was it made me realize how often I would get lost in my judgments, being worried about things, or being indignant about things, or being expectant, hopeful about things, or filled with dread about things, approving, disapproving, liking, disliking, wanting, regretting, and so on. And so during this time, as I saw my mind sort of chasing after something, I would catch it and say, okay, well, this is the feeling of regretting that we spent that time in that really nice cafe because now we've arrived at the station too late for the train. Feeling. That's what this is. It's this feeling. This is the having arrived at the station on time and learning that the train that we were going to catch has been preponed, which is in the Oxford English Dictionary, and it's defined as a word that is well known in India and often used by the Indian railway system. And preponed is the opposite of postponed. I kid you not, you can look it up in the OED, that you've arrived on time and the train has been preponed. It has left already. How can the train have left? It's 9 o'clock. The train doesn't leave until 10. The train has been preponed. It has already gone. It's that feeling. A mixture of delight at learning a new word, and frustration and reasonable indignation. Our train has already gone. It's that feeling. And when you do this, I highly recommend this as a simple and direct way of reflection, because in that moment of recognizing, it's this feeling then in that moment there's just, like I was saying yesterday about the oil and the water, in that moment that which is aware of the feeling is recognized as not being identified with the feeling. There's a disentanglement, there's a freedom from that. So even if it's something that is very testing or very annoying or frustrating, or just something that's physically challenging, like in the hot like that year in the hot season, when we were in Varanasi, and I thought, I can't believe I've ever that it could ever get any hotter than this. This is incredible heat. So my little clock, a digital clock, had a thermometer on it. I thought, well, I'll put it out in the sunshine to see what temperature it actually is. In full sun at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It reached 137 and then started spasming. 137 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it started having a spasm, and so I pulled it in from the sunlight. So it was something like 115 or 118 in the shade, but 137 in full sunlight. But it's this temperature. It feels like this. This is the it can't get much hotter than this, I hope, feeling. And in that moment, even though the heat is still there, that which is, say, drawn into liking it, dreading it, worrying about it, there's suddenly some space in the mix. There's room around it. There's the recognition. This is the attitude. The awareness of this feeling is one thing, and then the feeling is another. Aha! So even though the heat is still there, there's a freedom within it. There's a spaciousness and an ease, even though it's 137 degrees in the sunshine. So as the days unfold, the nights and daytimes, and the flow of our retreat takes shape, develop mindfulness in this way. See if you can keep track of the flow of moods and perceptions, and then when you apply this kind of simple naming of what's happening, see the effect. Just notice that. Just bring attention to that. When you name something, even that's really unwanted, that's challenging or difficult, just to be able to name it, to clarify what's present, not to do anything with it. just naming what's there. This is what it is. It's like this. Notice the effect that has in the heart. Even though the problem is still there, or the difficulty, or the illness, or the challenge might still be there, suddenly there's an okayness, a rightness, because the feeling of dukkha, that what we usually translate as suffering, is in a way it's based around the assumption it shouldn't be this way. Something's gone wrong with the universe, and it shouldn't be like this. And the transcending of dukkha, or the freedom from dukkha, doesn't mean that everything fits our expectations, or nothing bad ever happens to us, or we'll never get ill, or everybody will like us. This is not how dukkha comes to an end. Because even the Buddha was not able to make everybody like him. Even the Buddha had physical illnesses. He had chronic back pain when he was an old man. He couldn't find any kind of physical comfort unless he completely absorbed his mind into emptiness. So dukkha is that feeling of it shouldn't be this way. And when we make this simple gesture of recognizing, it's this. This is the train has been preponed feeling. And we've got to wait for another day and a half for the next one feeling. In that moment, the wrongness has dissolved. The train is not there, but that quality of it shouldn't be this way, this isn't fair, it's not right, the universe is out of order. That dukkha has ended. There's a rightness to it. And when I was talking about metta as a radical acceptance, it's exactly this, that even though we don't like it, here it is. Even though we might never have chosen this, here it is. It's this way. And this is the ending of dukkha. Dukkha nirodha comes with that, letting go of that feeling of wrongness that is imposed by our habits of judgment onto the present. Because in essence, how could the universe be wrong? Even if it's something that we dislike, something that's very, very painful or unwanted, if you think about it, how can the universe go wrong? Certainly, harmful things can be done, painful things can be experienced, but you look at that idea, that judgment of wrongness. So it shouldn't be this way. Maybe one last story to share with you. When one of the monks in our community years ago had really dodgy knees, and both of them needed surgery. And normally, when you have knee surgery, you do one side, let it recover, and then you do the other. But this particular monk thought, well, I don't want to be down in Bangkok. I want to get back to the northeast. I just want to get this over and done with. That'll make it much simpler, won't it? Big mistake. So anyway, he had both knees operated on at the same time and was stuck in hospital in Bangkok and getting more and more miserable as the recovery was very slow. And it just so happened Ajahn Chah was in Bangkok, had to go and do some teachings there, and he went to visit this monk in the hospital. And he asked the fateful question, "How are you?" So immediately this monk launched into this long, mournful diatribe about how his knees and the surgery and the recovery, and the theme of the whole thing was, it shouldn't be this way. It's not fair. And after he, given full voice to this diatribe and moaned for a while and paused for breath, Ajahn Chah said to him, "If it shouldn't be this way, it wouldn't be this way." He didn't actually say "duh," but that was all he needed. Was to say, if it shouldn't be this way, it wouldn't be this way. You're trying to dwell in a reality that doesn't exist. Therefore, dukkha. So on that note, I will offer, before anybody's knees get wrecked for the evening, I'll offer these thoughts for consideration, and so please reflect on this.